generation, and the market system wouldn't do it. And there may come a time when the market system will do it all by itself. We won't make big changes, and it's so speculative anyway in terms of even what the law would be. But beyond that, if it becomes less speculative as the law, I mean, it really looks like something is going to, it doesn't change us big time at all. Charlie?
Nothing to add. We're not going to change anything at the railroad for some little tax jiggle.
If we need a bridge repaired, we're going to repair the bridge, and if we need a lot of track maintenance all the time and that sort of thing, and it just, I don't think Matt and I have ever had a talk about it since we've owned the railroad. Greg?
Warren, my question also relates to Burlington Northern. Despite the current administration's belief that they can bring the coal industry back, market forces continue to lead to the industry's demise. While 90% of U.S. coal consumption is driven by electricity generation, natural gas has been both cheaper and cleaner burning, and renewable electricity generation has remade parts of the market as wind and solar have gained scale and become cheaper alternatives. This has created problems for Burlington Northern, with coal shipments accounting for just 18% of volume and revenue for the railroad last year, down from an average of 24% for both measures the previous 10 years. While some of this was due to a large buildup of coal supplies the past couple of winters, which finally seem to be working their way out, what are your expectations for the contribution coal can make to BNSF longer term? And I know that the railroad currently handles some export shipments going through Canada's Pacific Coast ports, but will there be enough growth there to offset domestic demand, or will BNSF need to rely more heavily on segments like intermodal to offset lost coal volumes?
Yeah, the answer is coal is going to go down over time. I don't think there's much question about that. The specifics of any given year relate very importantly to the price of natural gas. I mean, right now the demand is somewhat up, a fair amount up from last year, because natural gas is at $3.15 or $3.20, and the utilities can produce electricity in many cases quite a bit cheaper with coal than with natural gas, whereas with the $2 it would be natural gas. But over time, coal is in my mind is essentially certain to decline as a percentage of the revenue of the railroad. The speed at which it does, you don't create generation plants overnight, and so you can't predict the rate. And if natural gas is cheap enough, it's going to be you'll see a big conversion back to natural gas. So coal is going to go down as a percentage of revenues significantly. Certainly over 10 years it'll be quite significant, and who knows exactly year by year. We are looking for other sources of growth than coal. If you're tied to coal, you've got problems. Charlie?
Well, if you go out over the extremely long term, I think that all the hydrocarbons will be used, including all the coal. So I think that in the end, these hydrocarbons are a huge resource for humanity, and I don't think we've got any good substitute. And I've never minded saving them for the next generation. I don't like using them up very fast. So I'm off on a little road on my own on this one. And people think that all this hydrocarbons are going to be stranded and the whole world's going to change. I think we're going to use every drop of the hydrocarbons sooner or later. We'll use them as chemical feedstocks. I regard all these things as very hard to predict, and I'm not at all sure that I would eventually expect natural gas to be pretty short in supply.
A change in storage would make a big difference. We will produce within a few years as much electricity in Iowa, or virtually as much electricity in Iowa from wind as our customers use. but the wind only blows about 35% of the time or something like that, and sometimes it blows too hard. But the storage, having it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is a real problem, even if we've got the capability of producing, like I say, a self-sufficient amount, essentially, in Iowa before very long. Coal, our shipments of coal are up fairly substantially this year on the BNSF, but they were very low last year, and as you said, stockpiles grew and have come down somewhat. They're still on the high side. But in my mind, Charlie's got a longer-term outlook on this. In my mind, we're going to be shipping a whole lot less coal 10 or 20 years from now than we are now. On the other hand, I think there's some decent prospects in other long hauls. I mean, it's a pretty cheap way to move bulk commodities long distance, rail is, and I think it's a good business, but the coal aspect of it's going to diminish. Okay, station 6.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. It's Marcus Burns from Sydney, Australia. My question, Mr. Buffett, is you used to buy capital-light, cash-generative businesses, but now buy lower-growth, capital-consumptive businesses. I realise Berkshire generates a lot of cash flow, but would shareholders have been better off if you had continued to invest in capital-light companies?
Well, we'd love to find them. I mean, there's no question that buying a high return on assets, very light capital intensive business that's going to grow beats the hell out of buying something that requires a lot of capital to grow. And this varies from day to day, but I believe, and I don't think it's sufficiently appreciated, I believe that probably the 5 largest American companies by market cap, and some days we're in that group and some days we aren't. Let's assume we're not in that group on a given day. They have a market value of over $2.5 trillion. And that $2.5 trillion is a big number. I don't know whether the aggregate market cap of the U.S. market is, but that's probably getting up close to 10% of the whole market cap of the United States. And if you take those 5 companies, essentially you could run them with no equity capital at all. None. That is a very different world than when Andrew Carnegie was building a steel mill and then using the earnings to build another steel mill and getting very rich in the process, or Rockefeller was building refineries and buying tank cars. Generally speaking, for a very long time in our capitalism, growing and earning large amounts of money required considerable reinvestment of capital and large amounts of equity capital. The railroads being a good example. That world has really changed, and I don't think people quite appreciate the difference. You literally don't need any money to run the 5 companies that are worth collectively more than $2.5 trillion and who have outpaced any number of those names that were familiar if you looked at the Fortune 500 list 30 or 40 years ago, whether it was Exxon or General Motors or you name it. So we would love, there's no question that a business that doesn't take any capital and grows and has, almost infinite returns on required equity capital is the ideal business. And we own a couple of businesses, a few businesses that earn extraordinary returns on capital, but they don't grow. We still love them, but if they were in fields that would grow, believe me, they would be number 1 on our list. We aren't seeing those that we can buy and that we understand well. But you are absolutely right that's a far, far, far better way of laying out money than what we're able to do when buying capital-intensive businesses. Charlie?
Yeah, the chemical companies of America at one time were wonderful investments. Dow and DuPont sold at 20 sometimes earnings, and they kept building more and more complicated plants and hiring more PhD chemists, and it looked like they owned the world. Now most chemical products are sort of commoditized, and it's a tough business being a big chemical producer. And in comes all these other people like Apple and Google, and they're just on top of the world. I think the questioner's basically right that the world has changed a lot, and that the people who have made the right decisions in getting into these new businesses that are so different from the old ones have done very well.
Yeah, Andrew Mellon would be absolutely baffled by looking at the high cap companies now. I mean, the idea that you could create hundreds of billions of value essentially without assets, without tangible assets. Fast, yeah. But that is the world. I mean, when Google can sell you something that where Geico was paying $11 or something every time somebody clicks something, that is a lot different than spending years finding the right site and developing, iron mines to supply the steel plants, and railroads to haul the iron to where the steel is produced, and distribution points and all that sort of thing. Our world was built, and when we first looked at it, our capitalist system basically was built on tangible assets and reinvestment and all that sort of thing, and a lot of innovation and invention to go with it. But this is so much better if you happen to be good at it, to essentially be able to build hundreds of billions of market value without really needing any capital. That is a different world than existed in the past, and I think it's a world that's likely to continue. I mean, the trend is. I don't think the trend in that direction is over by a long shot.
A lot of the people who are chasing that sort of thing very hard now in the venture capital field are losing a lot of money. It's a wonderful field, but not everybody's going to win big in it. A few are going to win big in it.
Okay, Carol.
This question is from a shareholder in California, in the Silicon Valley area, who didn't want his name mentioned because he said he wasn't looking for publicity, but whose picture makes him appear to be a millennial. Every Berkshire shareholder knows about the stock market value of Berkshire. But my question is about the value of Berkshire to the world. For instance, the value of Apple to the world has been iPhones. The value of Geico is cost-effective auto insurance. The value of 3G, and I will tell you that there aren't some shareholders who would be arguing about here, but the value of 3G is improved operations. But about Berkshire, I just don't know. In managing Berkshire's subsidiaries, as Mr. Munger once famously said, you practice delegation just short of abdication. So hands-on management can't be the answer. That means the majority of Berkshire's subsidiaries would do just as well if they were to stay independent companies. So that's my question. What is the value of Berkshire to the world?
Yeah, well, I would say the question about, I'm with him to the point where he says that, which he accurately describes as delegation to the point of abdication, but I would argue that abdication actually, in many cases, will enable those businesses to be run better than they would if they were part of the S&P 500 and the target perhaps of activists or somebody that wants to get some kind of a jiggle in the short term. So I think that our abdication actually has some very positive value on the companies, but that you'd have to look at it company by company. That we've got probably 50 managers in attendance here, and naturally they're not going to say anything probably on television or anything where they knock us or anything, but get them off in a private corner and just ask them whether they think their business can be run better with a management by abdication from Berkshire, but with also all the capital strengths of Berkshire, that any project makes sense can be funded in a moment without worrying whether the banks are still lending like in 2008, or whether Wall Street will applaud it or something of that sort. So I think our hands-off style actually, I think, can add significant value in many companies. But we do have managers here you could ask about that. We certainly don't add the value by calling them up and saying that we've developed a better system, for turning out additives at Lubrizol or running Geico better than Tony Nicely can run it or anything of the sort. But we do we have a very objective view about capital allocation. We can free managers. I would say that we might very well free up at least 20% of the time of a CEO in the normal public, who would otherwise have a public company, just in terms of meeting with analysts and the calls and dealing with banks and all kinds of things that essentially we relieve them of. That they can spend all of their time figuring out the best way to run their business. So I think we bring something to the party, even if we're just sitting there with our feet up on the desk. Charlie?
Yeah, we're trying to be a good example for the world. I don't think we'd be having these big shareholder meetings if there weren't a little bit of teaching ethos in Berkshire. And I've watched it closely for a long time. I'd argue that that's what we're trying to do, is set a proper example. Stay sane, be honest. Yeah. So I'm proud of Berkshire, and I don't worry too much if we sell Coca-Cola.
I would say Geico is an extraordinarily well-run company, and it would be extraordinarily well-run if it were public. But it has gone from 2 and a fraction percent of the auto insurance market to 12%. And part of the reason, the small part, the real key is Geico and Tony Nicely, but part of the reason is that when at least 2 of our competitors, big competitors, said that they would not meet their profit objectives if they didn't lighten up their interest in new business 8 or 10 months ago. I think our business decision to step on the gas is a better business decision, but I think that Geico as a public company would have more trouble making that decision than they do when they're part of Geico, because we are thinking about nothing but where Geico is going to be in 5 or 10 years. And if that requires we want new business costs to penalize our earnings in the short term. And other people have different pressures. I'm not arguing about how they behave, because they have a different constituency than Geico has with Berkshire and what Berkshire has with its shareholders in turn. And I think in that case our system's superior. But it's not because we work harder. Charlie and I don't do hardly anything. Jonathan?
Could you please talk about your periodic payment annuity business? The weighted average interest rate on these contracts is 4.1%, which doesn't sound particularly attractive given the current interest rate environment. Is the duration of these liabilities long enough to make that an attractive cost of funds, or were these contracts executed primarily when rates were higher?
Well, those contracts, these are what are called structured settlements primarily. And when somebody young has a terrible auto accident or whatever it may be, perhaps urged by the court, urged by family members who really do have the interest of the injured party at heart, they may convert what could be a large sum settlement, probably against an insurance company, maybe $1 million, maybe $2 million, into periodic payments for the rest of the life of the injured party. And we issue those for other insurance companies. In fact, sometimes the court directs that Berkshire or hint strongly that Berkshire should be the one to issue those, because you're talking with somebody's life 30 or 40 or 50 years from now, and the court or the lawyer or the family may want to be very, very sure that whoever makes that promise is going to be around to keep it, and Berkshire has a preferred position in that. We look, to get to your question, Johnny, we look for taking the longer maturity situations. We always have, and we have to make assumptions about mortality, and we have to make assumptions, and then we have to decide at what interest rate we'll do it. The 4.1 is a mix of a lot of contracts over a lot of years, obviously. We write maybe 30 million of these, 20 to 30 million a week, looking for the long maturities. And so if you take an average of 15 years or something of the sort, that's how we come up with that sort of a figure. We adjust them to interest rates at all times. And when doing that, we're making an assumption that we're going to earn more money than is inherent in the cost of these structured settlements. It's a business I think we've got 6 or 7 billion up now, and we'll keep doing them. And incidentally, probably a significant percentage of the 6 or 7 billion we're not yet paying anything on. Somebody else may have the earlier payments. And they're certainly weighted far out. So it's a business that we'll be in 10 or 20 years from now. We've got some natural advantage because people trust us more than any other company to make those payments. And the test is whether we earn over time a return above that which we're paying to the injured party. And that's a bet we're willing to make. But if interest rates continue to present levels for a long time, we would, assuming we kept the money in fixed income instruments, we'd have some loss in that. We've got an allowance in there for the expenses, incidentally, because we do make monthly payments to these people eventually. And we have to keep track of whether they're still alive or not, because you cannot count on the relatives of somebody that's deceased when a check is coming in every month to notify you promptly that the person has become deceased. But that number will go up over time. If interest rates stay where they are, that 4.1 will come down a little bit as we add new business. Okay, station 7.
Thank you, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, for all you've done and the opportunity to learn even more from your approach to investing in life. My name's Harry Hong, and I'm a respirologist from Vancouver, British Columbia. The question involves, back in 2001, you made an initial investment in USG shortly before the company declared bankruptcy due to the mounting asbestos liability. You held those shares through the bankruptcy process, even though standard wisdom says that the equity in Chapter 11 is usually worthless. Can you explain why USG's equity was a safe investment?
Well, I don't really remember all the details then.
It was very cheap. Very cheap.
Yeah, but I would say this. USG, we own, I'm not sure what percentage, but it's a very significant percentage. I know.
20% or something.
Probably 30% or something like that. But the USG overall has just been disappointing because the gypsum business has been disappointing. And I think, I may be wrong, I think they went bankrupt twice, first from asbestos going back and then subsequently because they just had too much debt. So it has not been a brilliant investment. Now, if gypsum prices were at levels that they were in some years in the past, it would have worked out a lot better.
But it hasn't been terrible.
No, it hasn't been terrible. But gypsum has taken a real dive several times, and there has been too much gypsum capacity. And then when it comes back, the managements have been not necessarily at USG, but including USG perhaps, they've gotten more optimistic about future demand than they should have. And they like, going back historically away, they like to build new plants. And it's a business where the supply has been potential supply has been significantly greater than demand in a lot of years. I mean, you've seen housing starts and since 2008 and 9 not come back anywhere near as much as people anticipated. So gypsum prices have moved up, but not dramatically. So I just put that one down as not one of our great ideas, not one of my great ideas. Charlie wasn't involved in that. It's no disaster, though.
No, it isn't. It's
Becky?
This question.
Oh,
Hello? Oh, there we go.
okay.
This question comes from Axel Meyerseek in Germany, who writes, if Ajit Jain were to retire or, God forbid, be promoted, what would be the impact on the insurance operations, both with regards to underwriting profit as well as the development of flow?
Well, nobody could possibly replace Ajit. I mean, you can't come close. But we have a terrific operation in insurance. We really do. Outside of Ajit, and it's terrific squared with Ajit. There are things only he can do. But there are a lot of things that are institutionalized, a lot of things in our insurance business where we've got extraordinarily able management too. So Ajit, for example, bought a company that nobody here has heard of probably called Guard Insurance a few years ago, based in workers' comp primarily. It's based improbably in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and it's expanding like crazy in Wilkes-Barre. And it's been a gem. And Ajit oversees it, but we've got a terrific person running it. And we bought Medical Protective some years ago. Tim Kennedy runs that. Ajit oversees it, but Tim Kennedy can run a terrific insurance company with or without Ajit, but he's smart enough to realize that if you got somebody like Ajit that's willing to oversee it to a degree, that's great. But Tim is a great insurance manager all by himself, and Medical Protective has been a wonderful business for us. Most people don't know we own it. The company goes back into the 19th century, actually. We've got a lot of good operations. If you look at that section in the annual report called Other Insurance Company, I mean, that is, in aggregate, that is a wonderful insurance company. There's very few like it. Geico is a terrific company. Ajit has made more money for Berkshire than I have probably, but we've still got what I would consider the world's best property casualty insurance operation, even without him. And with him, you know, nobody. I don't think anybody comes close. Charlie?
Well, a few years ago, California made a little change in its workers' compensation law. And Ajit saw instantly that it would cause the underwriting results to change drastically. And he went from a tiny percent of the market, like 10% of the market, which is big, and he just grasped a couple of $1 billion at least out of the air, like with snapping his fingers. And then when it got tough, he pulled back. We don't have a lot of people like Ajit. It's hard to just snap your fingers and grab a couple of $1 billion out of the air.
But we actually, the California workers' comp, though, Guard has moved into that. We have got a lot of terrific insurance managers. I mean, I don't know of a better collection anyplace. And Ajit has found some of those. I've gotten lucky a few times. I mean, Tom Nerney at U.S. Liability, that goes back, what, 15, 16 years. He is a terrific operation. It's not huge, but is so well managed. And People don't even know we own these things, but you look at that last line, and now we've added Peter Eastwood with Berkshire Hathaway especially, and these are really good businesses, I got to tell you. When you can produce underwriting profits and on top of that just hand more float, we don't have many businesses like that. Those are great businesses. We've got 100 billion plus of money that we get to earn on, while at the same time, overall, on balance, we're likely to make some additional money for holding it. If you can get somebody to hand you $104 billion and pay you to hold it while you get to invest and get the proceeds, it's a good business. Now, most people don't do well at it. And the problem is that what I just described tempts lots of people to get into it. And recently, people have got into it really just for the investment management. It's a way to earn money offshore. And we don't do that, but it can be done for small companies with investment managers. So there's a lot of competition in it. But we have some fundamental advantages, plus we have, in certain areas, plus we have absolutely terrific managers to maximize those advantages. And we're going to make the most of it. I've just been handed something Kraft Heinz came out with. They just came out with it commercially a few days ago, maybe a few weeks ago. At the directors' meeting, they had this. I had 3 of these. I'm sure that there's a member or two of the audience that may not approve of it, but they. I got to tell you, folks, it's good. It's a cheesecake arrangement with topping and Philadelphia cream cheese special on, so you create your own cheesecake. And I thought that I can eat it while Charlie's talking, and you'll be able to get it at the halftime. It's selling very well, and I think, just so you don't feel too guilty, I think it's 170 calories for this cherry one. Like I say, I had 3 of these desserts. I don't mind having 500 or 600 calories for dessert. I'll let somebody else eat the broccoli, and I'll have the dessert. So we'll be eating this, but you too, at halftime. I think they brought 8,000 or 9,000 of these. I'll be disappointed if we don't run out. Actually, I'll be disappointed in you, not them. Okay. Jay?
This question is on the topic of succession planning. Warren, there seem to be fewer mentions by name of top-performing Berkshire managers in this year's annual letter. Does this mean you're changing your message regarding the succession plan for Berkshire's next CEO?
Well, the answer to that's no. And I didn't realize there were fewer mentions by name. I write that thing out and send it to Carol, and she tells me go back to work. I don't actually think that much about how many personally get named. I would say this, and this is absolutely true. We have never had more good managers. Now it's because we've got more good companies, but we have never had more good managers than we have now. So but it has nothing to do with succession. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with that. We don't seem to have a whole lot of 20-year-olds.
Certainly not at the front table. Now we've got an extraordinary group of good managers, which is why we can manage by application. It wouldn't work if we had a whole bunch of people who were had come with the idea of getting my job. I mean, if we had 50 people out there, all who wanted to be running Berkshire Hathaway, it would not work very well. But they have the jobs they want in life. Tony Nicely loves running Geico, and you go down the line, they have jobs they love, and that's a lot better in my view than having a whole bunch of them out there that are kind of doing their job there, kind of hoping the guy that's competing with them will fail, so that when I'm not around, that they'll get the nod. It's a much different system than exists at most large American corporations. Charlie, got anything? Well, we'll go to station 8.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. My name is Vicky Wei. I'm an MBA student from the Wharton School of Business. This is my first time to be in the annual meeting. I'm really excited about it. Thanks for having us here. My question is, where do you want to go fishing for the next 3 to 5 years? Which sectors are you most bullish on, and which sectors are you most bearish on? Thank you.
Yeah. Charlie and I do not really discuss sectors much, nor do we let the macro environment or thoughts about it enter into our decision. We're really opportunistic. And we obviously are looking at all kinds of businesses all the time. I mean, it's a hobby with us almost, probably more with me than Charlie. But we're hoping we get a call, and we've got a bunch of fillers, and I would say this is true of both of us. We probably know in the first 5 minutes or less whether something is likely to or has a reasonable chance of happening. And it's just going to go through there, and it's going to. First question is can we really ever know enough about this to come to a decision? You know, and that knocks out a whole bunch of things, and there's a few, and then if it makes it through there, there's a pretty good, reasonable chance we may do something, but it's not sector specific. We do love the companies, obviously, with the moats around the product, where consumer behavior can be perhaps predicted further out. But I would say it's getting harder for us anyway, to anticipate consumer behavior than we might have thought 20 or 30 years ago. I think that's just a tougher game now. But we'll measure it, and we'll look at it in terms of returns on present capital, returns on prospective capital. A lot of people give you some signals as to what kind of people they are, even in talking in the first 5 minutes, and whether you're likely to actually have a satisfactory arrangement with them over time. So a lot of things go on fast, but we know the kind of sectors we kind of like to, or the type of business we kind of like to end up in, but we don't really say we're going to go after companies in this field or that field or another field. Charlie, you want to?
Yeah, some of our subsidiaries do little bolt-on acquisitions that make sense, and that's going on all the time. And of course we like it. But I would say the general field of buying whole companies, it's gotten very competitive. There's a huge industry of doing these leveraged buyouts. That's what I still call them. The people who do them think that's a kind of a bad marker, so they say they do private equity. You know, it's like making the janitor call himself the chief of engineering or something. But at any rate, the people who do the leveraged buyouts, they can finance practically anything in about a week or so through shadow banking, and they can pay very high prices and get very good terms and so on. So it's very, very hard to buy businesses, and we've done well because there's a certain small group of people that don't want to sell to private equity. And they love the business so much they don't want it just dressed up for resale.
We had a guy some years ago came to see me, and he was 61 at the time, and he said, "Look, I've got a fine business. I got all the money I can possibly need, but," he said, there's only one thing that worries me when I drive to work." Actually, there's more than one guy that's told me that's used the same term. He said, "There's only one thing that bothers me when I go to work. You know, if something happens to me today, my wife's left. You know, I've seen these cases where executives in the company try to buy them out cheap, or they sell to a competitor and all the people." He says, I don't want to leave her with a business. I want to decide where it goes, but I want to keep running it, and I love it." And he said, "I thought about selling it to a competitor, But if I sell it to a competitor, their CFO is going to become the CFO of the new company, and they're, on down the line. And all these people who help me build the business, a lot of them are going to get dumped, and I'll walk away with a ton of money, and some of them will lose their job. He said, I don't want to do that. And he says, I can sell it to a leveraged buyout firm who would prefer to call themselves private equity, but they're going to leverage it to the hilt, and they're going to resell it, and they're going to dress it up some, but in the end, it's not going to be in the same place. I don't know where it's going to go. He said, I don't want to do that. So he said, it isn't because you're so special. He says, there just isn't anyone else. If you're ever proposing to a potential spouse, don't use that line. But that's what he told me, and I took it well, and we made a deal. Logically, unless somebody has that attitude, we should lose in this market. I mean, you can borrow so much money so cheap, and we're looking at the money as pretty much all equity capital, and we're not competitive with somebody that's going to have a very significant portion of the purchase price carried in debt, maybe averaging 4% or something.
And he won't take the losses, so it goes down, he gets part of the profit if it goes up.
Yeah, his calculus is just so different than ours, and he's got the money to make the deal. So if all you care about is getting the highest price for your business, we are not a good call. And we will get some calls in any event, and we can offer something that wouldn't call it unique, but it's unusual. The person that sold us that business and a couple of others that actually it's almost word for word the same thing they say. They are all happy with the sale they made, very happy, and they have lots and lots and lots of money, and they're doing what they love doing, which is still running the business, and they know that they made a decision that will leave their family and the people who work with them all their lives in the best possible position. And that's, in their equation, they have done what's best. But that is not the equation of many people, and it certainly isn't the equation of somebody who buys it and borrows every dime they can with the idea of reselling it after they maybe dress up the accounting and do some other things. And, but when the disparity gets so wide between what a heavily debt financed purchase will bring as against an equity type purchase, it gets to be tougher. There's just no question about it, and it'll stay that way.
But it's been tough for a long time, and we've bought some good businesses.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew?
Warren, this comes from a shareholder who I think is here, who asked to remain anonymous, writes, 3 years ago, you were asked at the meeting about how you thought we should compensate your successor. You said it was a good question, and you would address it in the next annual letter. We've been patiently waiting. Can you tell us now, at least philosophically, how you've been thinking about the way the company should compensate your successor so we don't have to worry when the pay consultants arrive on the scene?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, at my age, I don't have to worry about things I said 3 years ago, but this guy, obviously much younger, remembers. I'll accept his word that I said that. There's a couple possibilities, actually. And I don't want to get into details on them, but you may have, and I actually would hope that we would have somebody, that's already very rich, which they should be, been working a long time and have got that kind of ability, that's very rich and really is not motivated by whether they have 10 times as much money as they and the families can need or 100 times as much. And they might even wish to perhaps set an example by engaging for something far lower than actually what you could say their true market value is. And that could or could not happen. I think it'd be terrific if it did, but I can't blame anybody for wanting their market value. And then if they didn't elect to go in that direction, I would say that you would probably pay them a very modest amount and then have an option which increased in value or increased in striking price annually. Nobody does this hardly. The Graham Holdings has done it. The Washington Post Company did a little bit, but would increase because, assuming that there were substantial retained earnings every year, because why should somebody retain a bunch of earnings and then claim they'd actually improve the value simply because they withheld the money from shareholders? So it's very easy to design that, and in private companies, people do design it that way. They just don't want to do it in public companies because they get more money the other way. But they might have a very substantial one that could be exercised, but where the shares had to be held for a couple of years after retirement, so that they really got the result over time that the majority of the stockholders would be able to get and not be able to pick their spots as to when they exercised and sold a lot of stock. It's not hard to design, and it really depends who you're dealing with in terms of actually how much they care about money and having money beyond what they can possibly use. And most people do have an interest in that, and I don't blame them. But I don't know, what do you think, Charlie?
Well, one thing I think is that I have avoided all my life compensation consultants. To me, it's I hardly can find the words to express my contempt.
I will say this, if the board hires a compensation consultant after I go, I will come back.
Mad. So I think there's a lot of mumbo jumbo in this field, and I don't see it going away.
Oh, it isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
No, it's going to get worse. I mean, if you look at, the way compensation gets handled, everybody looks at everybody else's proxy statement and says we can't possibly hire a guy that isn't been.
It's ridiculous.
So on, and the human relations department, work for the CEO, come in and suggest a consultant. What consultant is ever going to get another assignment if he says you should pay your CEO below down in the fourth quartile because you're getting a fourth quartile result? I mean, it just, it isn't that the people are evil or anything. It's just the nature of the situation. It produces a result that is not consistent with how representatives of the owners should behave.
It's even worse than that. Capitalism is the golden goose that we all live on, and if people generally get so they have contempt for it because they don't like the pay arrangements and the system, your capitalism may not last as well, and that's like killing the golden goose. So I think the existing system has a lot wrong with it.
I think there is something coming in pretty soon. I may be wrong about this, where companies are going to have to put in their proxy statement the CEO's pay to the average pay or something like that. That isn't going to change anything. I mean,
It won't change a thing.
it won't change a thing, and it'll cost us.
By the way, it won't get any headlines either. It'll be tucked away.
It'll cost us a lot of money, with 367,000 people employed around the world, and I mean, we'll hope to get something that makes it somewhat simpler so we can use estimates or something of the sort. But to get the median income or whatever, however the rules may read, and
That's what consultants are for, Warren.
Yeah, it's it is human nature that produces this, and I write in this letter to the managers every 2 years. I said the only excuse I won't take on something is that everybody else is doing it. But of course, everybody else is doing it is exactly the rationale for why people did not want to count the cost of stock options as a cost. I mean, it was ridiculous. All these CEOs went to Washington. They got the Senate, I think, to vote 88-9 to say that stock options aren't a cost. And then a few years later, that it became so obvious that they finally put it in, so it was a cost. It reminded me of Galileo or something. I mean, all these guys.
Worse. It was way worse. The Pope behaved better to Galileo than he was.
Well, anyway, I would hope, like I say, somebody whoever, and it doesn't even have to be, I'm not talking about the current successor or anybody else. I mean, the successors down the line are probably going to have gotten very, very wealthy by the time they're running Berkshire. And the incremental value of wealth gets very close to zero at some point. And there is a chance to use it as a different sort of model. But I don't have any problem if a system is devised that recognizes retained earnings. I've never heard anybody talk about it. At the 20 boards I've been on, or if you and I were partners in a business, and we kept retaining earnings in the business, and I kept having the value to buy a portion of you out at a constant price, you'd say this is idiocy. But of course, that's the way all the option systems are designed, and it's better to be for the CEO and for the consultants, and of course, usually if there's some correlation between what CEOs are paid and what boards are paid. If CEOs were getting paid at the rate that they got paid 50 years ago, adapted to present dollars, director pay would be lower. So it's got all these built-in things that, to some extent, sort of kindle the.
No Berkshire director is in it for the money.
Well, they are. They own a lot of stock, and they bought it in the market just like this.
Yeah. No,
shareholder did.
it's a very old-fashioned system.
I looked at one company the other day, and 7 of the directors had never bought a share of stock with their own money. Now they've been given stock, but not one of the. I mean, I didn't say not one. 7 of the directors had never actually bought a share of stock, and there they are, making decisions on who should be CEO and how they should be paid and all that sort of thing. But they've never felt like shelling out a dollar themselves. Now they've been given a lot of stock. It's, we're dealing with human nature here, folks, and that what you want is to have a system that works well in spite of how human nature is going to drive it. And we've done awfully well in this country in that respect. I mean, American businesses overall has done very, very well for the Americans generally. But not every aspect of it is exactly what you want to teach your kids. Okay, Greg?
Warren, between 2010 and 2015, intermodal rail traffic enjoyed double-digit rates of revenue growth as shorter haul freight converted from truck to rail. During the past year or so, though, cheaper diesel prices and more readily available truckload capacity have made trucking more competitive, leading to a decline in intermodal rail traffic. While carload growth is expected to be solid longer term, helping to offset weakness in other segments like coal, what impact do you expect the widening of the Panama Canal, which was completed last year, to have on the West Coast port shipments that BNSF has traditionally carried through to exchange points for the eastern U.S. railroads, as shippers elect to have goods unloaded at ports in the Gulf of Mexico or up the eastern seaboard? And while a loss of volumes is never a good thing, could there be a small trade-off here as the bottleneck in Chicago, where most east-west cargo is handed off, eases a bit over time as some of the current traffic gets rerouted?
Well, Chicago has got lots of problems, and it's going to continue for a long. I mean, that requires a big solution. When you think of how the railroads developed, I mean, Chicago was the center, and you laid the rails, and there were a whole bunch of different railroads, 100 years ago, and city grows up around them and everything. So Chicago can be a huge problem. But getting to intermodal, I think intermodal will do very well. But you are correct that car loadings actually hit a peak in 2006. So here we are 11 years later. And the investment of the 5 big Class 1 railroads, 4 of the biggest, if you look at their investment beyond depreciation, it's tens and tens of billions of dollars, and we're carrying less freight, the 4 in aggregate, than we were in 2006. And coal will continue to decrease. It's a good business, and it has big advantages over truck in many respects. Truck gets much more of a free ride in terms of the fact that their right-of-way, which is the highway system, is, is subsidized to a much greater degree beyond the gas tax, than the railroad industry. But it has not been a growth business in physical volume to any great degree. I think it's unlikely to be. I think it's likely to be a good business. I think we've got a great territory. I like the West better than the East, and as you mentioned, there will be some intermodal traffic that gets diverted to eastern ports, perhaps, or so on. Overall, we've got a terrific system in that respect, and we will do well. It would be more fun if we had something where you could expect aggregate car loadings to increase 2 or 3 or 4% a year, but I don't think that's going to happen. I do think our fundamental position is terrific. However, I think we'll earn decent returns on capital, but I think that's the limit of it. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Okay, station 9.
I'm from Shankar Anand from Gurnee, Illinois. Thank you for doing everything you do for us. I have a question. The two of you have largely avoided capital allocation mistakes by bouncing ideas off of one another. Will this continue long into Berkshire's future? And I'm interested in both at headquarters and at subsidiaries.
It can't continue very long.
Don't get defeatist, Charlie. Any successor that's put in at Berkshire, capital allocation abilities and proven capital allocation abilities are certain to be uppermost in the board's minds, or in the current case, in terms of my recommendation, Charlie's recommendation, for what happens after we're not around. Capital allocation is incredibly important at Berkshire. Right now we have 280 or 90 billion, whatever it may be, of shareholders' equity. If you take the next decade alone, nobody can make accurate predictions on this, but in the next 10 years, if you just take and depreciation right now is another $7 billion a year, something on that order. The next manager in the decade is going to have to allocate maybe $400 billion or something like that, maybe more, and it's more than already has been put in. So 10 years from now, Berkshire will be an aggregation of businesses where more money has been put in that decade than everything that took place ahead of time. So you need a very sensible capital allocator in the job of being CEO of Berkshire, and we will have one. It would be a terrible mistake to have someone in this job where really capital allocation might even be their main talent. It probably should be very close to their main talent. And of course, we have an advantage at Berkshire in that we do know how important that is, and there is that focus on it. And in a great many companies, people get to the top through ability and sales. Sometimes they come from the legal side, all different sides, and they then have the capital allocation sort of in their hands. Now, they may not establish strategic thinking divisions, and they may listen to investment bankers and everything, but they better be able to do it themselves. And if they've come from a different background or haven't done it, it's a little bit, as I put in one of my letters, I think it's like getting to Carnegie Hall, playing the violin, and then you walk out on the stage and they hand you a piano. I mean, it is something that Berkshire would not do well if somebody was put in who had a lot of skills in other areas, but really did not have an ability of capital allocation. I've talked about it as being something I call a money mind. I mean, people can have 120 IQs or 140 IQs or whatever it may be, very similar scoring abilities in terms of intelligence tests, and some of them have minds that are good at one type of thing and some of them another. I've known very bright people that do not have money minds, and they can make very unintelligent decisions. They can do all kinds of other things that most mortals can't do, but it just isn't the way their wiring works. And I've known other people that really would not do that brilliantly. They do fine, but on an SAT test or something like that. But they've never made a dumb money decision in their life. And Charlie, I'm sure, has seen the same thing. So we do want somebody, and hopefully they've got a lot of talents, but we certainly do not want somebody that, if they lack a money mind. Charlie?
Well, there's also the option of buying in stock, which, so it isn't like it's some hopeless problem. One way or another, something intelligent will be done.
And a money mind will recognize when it makes sense to buy in stock and doesn't. And in fact, it's a pretty good test for some people in terms of managements, how they think about something like buying in stock. Because it's not a very complicated equation if you sort of think straight about that sort of a subject. But some people think that way and some don't, and they're probably miles better at something else. But they say some very silly things when you get to something that seems so clear as whether, say, buying in stock makes sense. Anything further, Charlie?
No.
Okay, Carol.
This question comes from Steve Haberstroh of Connecticut. Warren, you've made it very clear in your annual letter that you think the hedge fund compensation scheme of 2 and 20 generally does not work well for the fund's investors. And in the past, you have questioned whether investors should pay, quote, financial helpers, unquote, as much as they can. But financial helpers can create tremendous value for those they help. Take Charlie Munger, for instance. In nearly every annual letter and on the movie this morning, you describe how valuable Charlie's advice and counsel has been to you, and in turn to the incredible rise in Berkshire's value over time. Given that, would you be willing to pay the industry standard, quote, financial helper fee of 1% on assets to Charlie? Or would you perhaps even consider 2 and 20 for him? What is your judgment about this matter?
Yeah. Well, I've said in the annual report that I've known maybe a dozen people in my life. And I said there are undoubtedly hundreds or maybe thousands out there, but I've said that I've known personally a dozen where I would have predicted, or did predict, in a fair number of those 12 cases, I did predict that the person involved would do better than average in investing over a long period of time. And obviously, Charlie is one of those people. So would I pay him? Sure. But would I take financial advisors as a group and pay them 1% with the idea that they would deliver results to me that were better than the S&P 500 by 1%, and thereby leave me breaking even against what I could have done on my own? There's very few. So it's just not a good question to ask whether, I'd pay Charlie 1%. That's like asking, whether I'd have paid Babe Ruth, 100,000 or whatever it was to come over from the Red Sox to the Yankees. I mean, sure I would have, but there weren't very many people I would have paid 100,000 to in 1919 or whatever it was to come over to the Yankees. So it's a fascinating situation, because the problem isn't that the advisors are going to do so terrible. It's just that you have an option available that doesn't cost you anything, that is going to do better than they are in aggregate. And it's an interesting question. I mean, if you hire an obstetrician, assuming you need one, they're going to do a better job of delivering the baby than if the spouse comes in to do it, or if they just pick somebody up off the street. And if you go to a dentist, if you hire a plumber, in all the professions, there is value added by the professionals as a group compared to doing it yourself or just randomly picking laymen. In the investment world, it isn't true. I mean, the active group, the people that are professionals in aggregate, cannot do better than the aggregate of the people who just sit tight. And if you say, well, in the active group, there's some person that's terrific, I will agree with you. But the passive people can't all pick that person, and they don't know how to identify them. So
It's even worse than that. The expert who's really good, when he gets more and more money in, he suffers just terrible performance problems.
Yeah.
And so you'll find the person who has a long career at 2 and 20, and if you analyze it, net all the people have lost money because some of the early people have had a good record, but more money come in later and they lose it. So the investing world is it's a morass of wrong incentives, crazy reporting, and I'd say a fair amount of delusion.
Yeah, if you asked me whether those 12 people I picked would do better than the S&P working with $100 billion, I would answer that probably none of them would. I mean, that would not be their perspective performance. But when I was talking of them, or referencing them, and when they actually worked in practice, they dealt generally with pretty moderate sums. And as the sums grew, their relative advantage diminished. I mean, it's so obvious from history. The example I used in the report, I mean, the guy who made the bet with me, and incidentally, all kinds of people didn't make the bet with me because they knew better than to make the bet with me. There were hundreds, at least a couple hundred underlying hedge funds. These guys were incented to do well. The fund-to-fund manager was incented to pick the best ones they could pick. The guy who made the bet with me was incented to pick the best fund-to-funds, and tons of money. And just with those 5 funds, a lot of money went to pay managers for what was subnormal performance over a long period of time. And it can't be anything but that. And it's an interesting profession when you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are compensated based on selling something that in aggregate can't be true, superior performance. So, but it'll continue, and the best salespeople will tend to attract the most money, and because it's such a big game, people will make huge sums of money, far beyond what they're going to make in medicine or you name it. I mean, repairing the country's infrastructure. I mean, the big money, huge money, is in selling people the idea that you can do something magical for them. And if you even have $1 billion fund, and get 2% of it for terrible performance, that's $20 million. In any other field, it would just blow your mind. But people get so used to it, in the field of investment, that it just sort of passes along. And $10 billion, I mean, $200 million fees. We've got 2 guys in the office, that are managing $11 billion. Well, no, they're not. I'm sorry. They're managing $20 billion. Between the 2 of them, $21 billion maybe. We pay them $1 million a year, plus the amount by which they beat the S&P. They have to actually do something to get contingent compensation, which is much more reasonable than 20%. But how many hedge fund managers in the last 40 years have said, I only want to get paid if I do something for you? Unless I actually deliver something beyond what you can get yourself, I don't want to get paid. It just doesn't happen. And it gets back to that line that I've used. But when I asked the guy, how can you, in good conscience, charge 2 and 20? And he said, because I can't get 3 and 30. Any more, Charlie, or are we used up our?
I think you've beaten up on them enough.
Yeah, well. Jonathan.
Precision Cast Parts represents the second largest acquisition Berkshire has ever made. There wasn't much qualitative or quantitative information about it in the 2016 annual. Would you be willing to update us here with how it is doing currently, what excites you about its prospects, and what worries you most about it? I'm also curious if there were any meaningful purchase price adjustments beyond intangible amortization that negatively impacted Precision's earnings in 2016, as was the case with Van Tile in 2015. And finally, are there any opportunities in sight for bolt-on acquisitions?
Yeah, we've actually made acquisitions, and we will make more that fit there because we've got an extraordinary manager, and we've got a terrific position in the aircraft field. So there will be the chance for sensible acquisitions, and we've already made 2 anyway, and we will make more over time. The amortization of intangibles is the only big purchase price adjustment. That's something over $400 million a year, non-deductible. In my mind, that's 400 and some million of earnings. I do not regard the economic goodwill of Precision Cast Parts being diminished at that rate annually. That is and I've explained that in some degree. As a very long-term business, you can worry about 3D printing. I don't think you have to worry about aircrafts being manufactured. But aircraft deliveries can be substantially altered in relation to any given backlog in most cases. So the deliveries can be fairly volatile, but I don't think the long-term demand is anything I worry about. And the question is whether anybody can do it better or cheaper, or like I say, whether 3D printing at least takes away part of the field in some respect. But overall, I will tell you, I feel very good about Precision Cast Parts. It is a very long-term business. I mean, we have contracts that run for a very long time, and like I say, the initiation of a new plane may be delayed or something of the sort. But if you take a look at the engine that's in the other adjoining room here and in our exhibition hall, you would, if you were putting that engine together with a 20 or 25-year life or whatever it may have, carrying hundreds of people, you would care very much about your supplier, and you'd care not only in the quality, which would be absolutely, you'd care of the work being done, but you also, if you were an engine manufacturer or an aircraft manufacturer further down the line, you would care very much about the reliability of delivery on something, because you do not want a plane that, or an engine, is 99% complete while somebody is dealing with the problem of faulty parts or anything else that would delay delivery. So the reliability is incredibly important. I don't think anybody has a reputation better than Mark Donegan and the company for delivery. So I love the fact we bought Precision Cast Parts. Charlie?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, too, is that it's a very good business purchased at a fair price but this is no screaming bargain like the old days. No. For quality businesses, you pay up now a lot more than we used to.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and you don't get a bargain price. The 400+ million, incidentally, goes on for quite a while too, and we'll explain it in the report, just as we'll explain, that the depreciation charge at a railroad would not be adequate. I mean, it's the way accounting works. And starting, I don't even want to tell you about this one, but starting the first of next year, accounting is going to become sort of a nightmare in terms of Berkshire and other companies, because they're going to have us mark our equities to market, just like we were a Wall Street trading firm or something. And those changes in the value of Coca-Cola or American Express or anything are going to run through the income account every quarter. In fact, they run through it every day in this series, so that it really will get confusing. Now, it's our job to explain things so that you aren't confused when we report GAAP earnings. But GAAP earnings, as reported, will become even more meaningless looking only at the bottom line than they are now. And
That was not necessarily a good idea.
no, I think it's a terrible idea, but we'll deal with it. And I mean, it's my job to explain to what extent GAAP accounting is useful to you in evaluating Berkshire and the times when it actually distorts things. Accounting isn't supposed to it's not supposed to describe value. On the other hand, it's a terribly useful tool, if understood, in order to estimate value if you're analyzing businesses. And so in a certain way, you can't blame the auditing profession for doing what they think is their job, which is not to present value, although by using these market
But
values.
you can blame the audit.
What's that?
You can blame the audit profession
Okay,
for that one.
Yeah.
That was really stupid.
Well, I agree with that, actually. But we will do our best to give you, always going to give you the audited figures, and then we're going to explain their shortcomings in either direction and what you should use and what you probably should ignore in looking at those numbers and using them to come to a judgment as to the value of your holdings. And I'll explain it to you the same way I would explain it to my sisters or anybody else. That we want you to understand what you own, and we try to cover the details that are really important in that respect. I mean, there's a million things you can talk about that are just of minor importance when you're talking about a $400 billion market value. But they're the things that if Charlie and I were talking about the company, they'd be the figures or the interpretations or anything that we would regard as important in sort of coming to an estimate of the value of the business. But it's going to be, you can't knock the media. I mean, they've only got a few paragraphs to describe the earnings of Berkshire every quarter. But if they simply look at bottom line numbers, what can be silly this year will become absolutely ludicrous next year because of the new rule that comes into effect for 2018. Okay, station 10.
Hello, Warren. This is a question from China. I'm James Chen, a pension fund manager from China, Shanghai. My question is quite simple. What is the probability of duplicating your great investment track record in China's stock market the next decade or two in terms of investment pursuit? That's all. And thanks my friends from Hui Tianfu and Fugo Fund Management House for guiding me in raising this question. Thank you.
Charlie, you're the expert on China.
It's like determining the order of presidency between a louse and a flea. Yeah. I do think that the Chinese stock market is cheaper than the American market. And I do think China has a bright future. And I also think that there'll be growing pains, of course. But
Well,
we have this opportunistic way of going through life. We don't have any particular rules about which market we're in or anything like that.
Well, Charlie's delivered a headline anyway now. Munger predicts China market will outperform U.S. So, and I've just been informed it's 12:15, so I apologize if you're hungry for holding you over for 15 minutes. So we'll reconvene around 1:15, and I'll see you then. Thanks.
Hello again, and welcome to our halftime show. I'm Andy Serwer. You've just been listening to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger over in the CenturyLink Center answering questions for some 3 hours. We're adjacent to the CenturyLink Center in the convention hall. Behind me, there are thousands of people in addition to the 17,000 who have been in the arena listening to Warren Buffett. Joining us now is Berkshire Hathaway Director Ron Olson. He's also a name partner at Munger, Tolles & Olson. And Ron, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you. I like the backdrop of that last shot of me with DQ in the over my left shoulder.
There is a lot of branding going on here, isn't there, Ron?
Incredible branding, and that's one of the joys of these businesses.
So I just want to make it clear about the law firm that you are a partner at and have been for many years. And Charlie was a partner there too, but left quite some time ago.
Charlie Munger was a founder of our law firm, 1962. I joined the firm in 1968 as, I believe, the 8th member of the firm as it was at that point in time. Charlie has been retired as a partner in our firm for over 50 years. So, however, he has always officed with us. And he's always been available for consulting. And from the client's point of view, they're getting a fair amount of Munger time without any charge because I consult him, others consult him from time to time on various problems that we face. He loves law, but he loves his life investing and the independence that it has given him and his relationship with Warren.
Now, Ron, you've known Charlie and Warren for many decades. Often people group them together, yet they're very different people. Can you talk about how they're different, maybe?
That's a good observation, Andy. I think they're different. Well, they pointed out one way earlier today. Warren, he enjoys being out in the public and conversing with people like yourself. Charlie just soon sit at home or in his office in one of his comfortable chairs reading a book. That's one way they're different. They are very much the same in one very important respect, and that is their rationality. I do not know of any two people who are more rational at the way they order their life and make judgments for Berkshire shareholders than the two of them.
A lot of good conversation and questions this morning, Ron. Shareholders asking about Wells Fargo. I want to get your take on that part of the morning. So let's listen in and hear some of that today.
At Wells Fargo, there were 3 very significant mistakes, but there was one that dwarfs all of the others. You're going to have incentive systems at any business, almost any business. There's nothing wrong with incentive systems, but you've got to be very careful what you incentivize. And you can incentivize bad behavior, and if so, you better have a system for recognizing it. Clearly, at Wells Fargo, there was an incentive system built around the idea of cross-selling and number of services per customer, and the company in every quarterly investor presentation highlighted how many services per customer. So it was the focus of the organization, a major focus, and undoubtedly people got paid and graded and promoted based on that number, or at least partly based on that number. Well, it turned out that was incentivizing the wrong kind of behavior.
So Berkshire has a big stake in Wells, and they had these problems last year. Do these questions rise to the board level? Is this something that you talk about? And what kinds of things rise to that level, Ron?
we certainly have talked about the wells issue, and probably one of the things I think is important for shareholders to appreciate about the relationship between Warren and the board is a lot of that conversation goes on not just in formal board meetings, but often on one-on-one kinds of conversations. And for instance, if we're looking at an acquisition in say the energy field, you can bet on additions to the Warren-Charlie exchanges, Walter Scott's going to be consulted. When we come to a problem like wells, I think I probably had a little more interaction with Warren than others did. He and I sort of went to school together on the Solomon problem, 1990. And we learned several things that he actually alluded to today. One was you've got to stop the bleeding. If you've got a wrong going on, you better be damn sure, if you're the CEO and you become aware of it, that you stop it. And John Goodfriend didn't at the time. We were later coming into Solomon, and John Stumpf was a little slow at wells. Secondly, it's important to get the facts and get them out and move on. We, ever since Solomon, have had a sort of a shorthand when we face a crisis situation: get it right, get it out, get it over. And they were a little slow in getting that done. So, yeah, the board, in response to your question, certainly cares about what's going on at wells. We've got a huge investment in wells, but we have great confidence in the long term, as Warren and Charlie have emphasized with regard to the businesses we own most of or all of. We have a lot of confidence in the durability of the long-term earning power of wells. It's got millions of depositors that are, I think, provided an enormous base for its continued earning power, despite what has been a serious hiccup.
All right, some very interesting perspective from Ron Olson, Berkshire Hathaway Director. Ron, thanks so much for coming by.
I'm glad to do it.
Thank you, sir.
Good luck.
A lot more to come today. In a few minutes, the chairman of Coca-Cola, Muhtar Kent, and the company's new CEO, James Quincy. Jen.
Hey there, Andy. We are up in the press box in the arena. Everybody filing out to get some food. I'm joined by Robert Miles. He's an author and also teaches a class on sort of all things Warren Buffett, trying to value companies the way that he does. I want to ask you, what jumped out at you from today's meeting? I kind of picked up on what they were talking about when they mentioned Google and maybe making a mistake there by not getting into that. Did that get your attention?
That was one thing, as well as the autonomous vehicles. But in 2000, during a surprise celebration of Warren's 70th birthday, I asked him at lunch what his favorite website was. And unfortunately, he didn't say Yahoo, but he did say it was Google, and that it used to be Alta Vista, but he explained the metrics of, instead of pay for play, but pay based on the search of others. And that was 4 years before they went public.
So I guess that really brings it back to the comments where Charlie Munger said we kind of blew it on one of those stocks there. Let's talk about the autonomous vehicles. Why is that so bad and such a possible headwind for the company?
Well, because they're in the insurance business, and autonomous vehicles will fortunately make us safer.
No more accidents.
Well, we hope, and I understand that tractors today, farm tractors, are using autonomous drivers in their tractors, so it is already being integrated into automation in the United States as well as around the world. So when it comes to trucks and also comes to vehicles, it's going to obviously impact the railroads, as they mentioned, as well as their automobile insurance.
Two other tech companies that came up, IBM versus Apple. They had a question, and I think one of the things they said was, we're not apples to apples exactly, they're not apples to oranges. What did you think about that answer?
Well, they're apples to IBMs, I guess. And he saw Apple as being a consumer goods business, as well as IBM obviously being business services. I was just at the IBM annual meeting, and they did talk about their cloud business as growing and representing an ever-increasing part of their business, but they have had to pay their medicine to recreate themselves. But they have bought back $35 billion worth of their stock as well, returning value to the shareholders in that way.
Certainly on shareholders' minds, especially given the news on Friday about decreasing their holdings. Robert Miles, thank you so much. Andy, I'm going to throw it back to you.
All right, thanks, Jen. And coming up, we have a lot more special guests, including Glenn Close and Kathy Ireland. Get that. So what's the process for selecting questions in the meeting? Carol Loomis is one of the journalists asking those questions, and I asked her, how do you get a question asked?
Well, I think everybody who sends me a question probably wonders that too. First of all, there are 3 journalists who ask questions, and you're really talking about what did the 3 journalists pick. Although they're analysts, there are 3 analysts who are also asking questions. And then there is questions from the audience, which are a wild card. You have no idea what's going to be said. Now, the questions start coming in to the 3 journalists, of which I'm one, and I'm the one who asks the first question. So this is very important. As far as I'm concerned, it's very important. Officially, they should start sending them in after the annual letter comes in. Some will send you early, but I don't pay any attention to them. And they start coming in, and there's a huge surge of questions on email. They have 3 email addresses for the journalists, and they start coming in immediately after the annual letter comes in. So, and there's a huge surge in the last few days of February and the first few days of March. Then it drops off to almost nothing. And then at the end, they're also told that they get a better chance of getting their question answered if they send it in early. And at least half the field pays no attention to that. So you get these big, complicated questions at the end of the period, and by that time you've got your list of what you think you might ask, and those don't get much attention. And that's very important.
So how many questions do you get, and how do you pick them?
Well, I'm going to break that down. First of all, the first question is how many people email me? That's going to be someplace around 225 or maybe 250. And some of those questions are also being sent to the other 2 journalists. And sometimes you will see a line up there that has all 3 journalists' email on it, so you know that. But others will maybe send one to a separate email to you, and will also send it to the other 2 journalists, Becky Quick from CNBC and Andrew Sorkin from the New York Times. So you don't know, it would hit their best chances of getting a question answered. I'm telling trade secrets here, if they would send all 3 of us and not tell us that they were sending to the other 3. Other people will send you their very best question, or what they think is their very best question, and hope that you choose that because they're not overloading you. And then the journalist has to sit down with, so you're talking about 500 questions you could choose from and pick. Each one of us gets to ask 6. And you have to have a field, you have to have a personal field of maybe 12 questions, because in between you're asking a question and you're getting to ask your next question, there are going to be, I think it's 5 people who are going to ask questions, and you don't know whether they're going to take one of the questions that you were going to ask the second thing. So it's a big lottery. I've had shareholders tell me, well, the questions seem to run to the same. Actually, I don't believe there is that much sameness to them, but it probably seems so to a diehard Berkshire fan.
There's almost literally a library of books that have been written about Buffett by now, including one by Carol Loomis. You can see right behind me, there's Carol Loomis's book, the cover right there, Tap Dancing to Work. And people are buying up those books. We're joined now by Chairman and CEO of Gabelli Asset Management, the legendary investor Mario Gabelli. Mario, great to see you.
Andy, always a privilege and delighted to be with you to talk about my favorite subject,
Thanks
stocks.
for coming by. Stocks, I love that. So what's your takeaway from the morning meeting?
Well, I think it's a continuation of what you read in his annual report, and that Warren continues to be a cheerleader for companies in the United States and the United States. The rule of law, meritocracy, and the free market system are all of the flaws, and they continue to allocate capital right. And so the questions were interesting. There was obviously some gal from Germany that asked something that I couldn't even understand. It kept going on, and the crowd got a little anxious. But a balance, good topical questions and good questions that you might consider that were around for an extended period of time, like continuity of management and so on.
I mean, in a way, it's extraordinary, these two guys in their 80s, and they continue to broaden their purview in terms of understanding the world. I mean, now it's China. They've actually gotten interested in technology stocks, but maybe that's through their money managers, right?
Well, Todd and Ted had an influence on the other side of what I would not have thought I would have heard Warren talking about was owning 4 airlines. He always had this quote that said, you want to become a millionaire, start with $1 billion and buy an airline, and that goes back to one of his investments back about 20 years ago in the airline industry.
Mario, you're known for investing in media stocks, so I want to ask you about that particular sector right now. You know, there's a lot of anxiety. A company will report numbers, and then people will say, oh, the business is dissipating. What's your overall take? And then I want to ask you about some specific stocks.
Well, Andy, if you and I were sitting here in 1955, there was 2.5 billion people in the world. Today there's 7.5 billion, and to the degree that they have content and connectivity. They had it then, but there was limited. I think we just introduced color television. And today we have an abundance of ways to watch content. So content and how do you repurpose it on a global basis is intriguing. But the part of content that millennials like and that people like and they like in real time is live entertainment. Now, whether that could be sports, for example, buying a baseball team, a soccer team like Manchester United, a baseball team like the Atlanta Braves, which we think you're buying at a bargain, or just watching Beyonce or Coachella or one of those concerts. So we look at that ecosystem and participate that way.
Quick last question. Still room for active managers out there? We're talking so much about passive investing.
Well, you think about what Warren said in his annual report. Todd and Ted, his 2 money managers, have $21 billion, and they're active managers. He's not indexing that money, so, you know, there is more than a good place. And as more we go index, there's more opportunity for us. And you're going to have John Bogle up next, and we are a 1%er relative to John. He's got $4 trillion, I've got $40 billion, so it is what it is in terms of what we manage, and we're strictly equities.
All right, Mario Gabelli, thanks so much for coming
Great
by.
to be here. Great to make a lot of money in the active equity markets. Thanks, Andy.
And speaking of Ted Weschler and Todd Combs, we'll be hearing from them later on in the program. So
great. Ask them the right questions. Thank you very much. Good
Thanks,
to be
Mario.
here.
Buffett is a big fan and a big investor in Coca-Cola. Earlier, I spoke with the company's leaders. I'm here with the 2 top executives of the Coca-Cola Company, Muhtar Kent, chairman, former CEO, and the new CEO, James Quincy. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
You guys just did a handoff of the CEO thing. Muhtar, let's start with you. You were CEO for 9 years. What do you think your greatest accomplishments were as the chief executive?
Well, certainly one of the greatest things that I'm the most proudest of is to have this smooth succession of leadership at the company, and James has taken over in our smoothest transfer of leadership in the company, and succession. And succession, as you know, is always talked about, but is not easy and is not always smooth. So we're very proud to have had a very smooth, great succession. And I believe we're in really good hands, and I'm very proud. And certainly, you know, when you look at the foundation of the Coca-Cola Company compared to what 9 years ago, it's very strong, and I know that James and his team are going to build on that strong foundation of $21 billion brands, of the shareholder value that we have created over the last 8-9 years, about $100 billion plus, and then take it to new levels. So I feel really good, and I think the best days are ahead.
Just to follow up a little bit, Muhtar, I mean, how is it different? How's the company different now than from when you came in?
Well, firstly, we were a hybrid business. We owned 25% of our global bottling business. we are now very rapidly moving in the last throes of moving to a pure business where we have franchised all of our bottling businesses to new partners, existing partners that are doing really well. And so about 50% of the total global bottling business has been restructured in the last 3-4 years. That is a massive undertaking. And I think when you look at the impact of that over the next 5 to 10 years, I believe that that's going to be very positive under especially great leadership like James and his new team.
All right, James, congratulations on the new gig, by the way.
Thank you, thank you.
And just started, what, how many days ago?
A whole 5 days ago.
All right, how do you like the job?
So far, so good.
So sort of a similar question, but looking forward, what are your top priorities as the new chief executive of Coca-Cola?
Well, I think Muhtar kind of set it up there, said we've spent, under his leadership, a number of years setting a really strong foundation, changing the way that we interact with our bottlers and refranchising. And now it's about the next stage of growth. It's about going on and completing the play and expanding the portfolio. We're known for our sparkling beverages, and they'll continue to grow and be great. We're actually establishing good leadership positions in other categories. We're very excited about them. So that's where the next stage of growth is going to come from. It's a vibrant beverage industry. We're the leader, and we want to expand that leadership across the board, the whole portfolio.
Yeah, I want to ask, there's so many SKUs. Here's one. This is kind of the something for the annual meeting, obviously. It's a Chinese Coke with Buffett on it, right?
Yes, indeed.
And this is just kind of fun. But there are so many different drinks that you have, your portfolio. Does that make it more difficult to manage the business?
Clearly, the more SKUs, the more different products you have, it makes it more complex to manage business, absolutely. But in the end, I think as we see the business and the development of what the consumer wants, as they spend more and more money on beverages, they don't want the same thing all the time. They want greater diversity and choice. And so part of what we need to do is respond not just with different products, different drinks, but different sizes. And so we launched this hopefully famous, but certainly famous in China. This is Cherry Coke. This was launched in China with Mr. Buffett's face on it, available downstairs now. You've got to sell every day. And we'll keep building new products and new sizes.
All right, Muhtar, speaking of Warren Buffett, we're here, of course, at the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. Warren Buffett, of course, a large Coke shareholder, has been for a long time. How do you keep that shareholder happy? How have you done that?
Well, first, it's the most incredible privilege to have Warren Buffett as your largest share owner. And I've certainly lived that every day as the former CEO. And I know James will continue living that privilege. And it's an amazing privilege. He's so engaging. He's so passionate. He's so authentic as a person and as a share owner. And I'm so proud to call him a friend, a partner, and have learned so much from him. And it's just an amazing, amazing privilege. And Warren is a brand himself. And we're a brand business, and we just have had so many wonderful conversations about brands and what they mean to people today versus yesterday. And we always say in the Coca-Cola business, a brand is a promise, and a good brand is a promise kept. And I think Warren lives that motto so well every single day of his life. And as I said, it's been an incredible privilege and continues to be an incredible privilege to have him as our largest share owner. And having fun like these cans that James just showed you when we launched Cherry Coke, to have him agree to have his portrait on the cans in China, and he's so well known in China, these are the other small, incredible benefits of having such an incredible share owner.
Now, the important part is making sure that Warren Buffett continues to say that he's at least 25% Coca-Cola. Right, James?
Yeah, exactly. He did say when he gets to 90, he might up it to another can a day.
Right. All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank
James Quincy, Muhtar Kent, Chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
A lot more still ahead. In a moment, the founder of Vanguard, Jack Bogle, who Warren Buffett this morning said has, quote, done more for the average investor than probably anyone in the country. Let's go down now to the floor and Jen.
Hi there, Andy. Well, I am here with Jim Weber. He is the CEO of Brooks. I literally just ran from the press box all the way down here, and I could have used some running shoes, in fact. Tell us about Brooks. What is different about you guys than every other running shoe company that's out there?
Well, 15 years ago, we decided to focus on one and only one thing, to be a running company, and hopefully gain the trust of runners to be their number one choice for their gear head to toe. We've never looked back. So that's what makes us different. We left athletic footwear and apparel, and all we do is run.
So you're not like about athleisure or basketball or hiking. It's literally just running.
Every day that you move or get a run in is better, and that's what we're cheering on and celebrating. And so all the gear we make is made to run in. You don't have to run in it, but if you did, it's going to work for you.
Okay, so if you really just want to be a lazy athleisure person, you can still wear the shoes. Talk to me about the special shoe that you guys have here, because there's 40 different companies down here at the expo, and a lot of them have something special for the shareholders at the annual meeting, and this is yours. I'll hold it up and let people see what's inside, and you can tell us.
Well, absolutely. We, sponsored athletes can move footwear in the athletic world. We have two of the most prolific sponsored athletes maybe in our industry, in Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. So we put them in the shoe. It's a Berkshire Hathaway special edition, and it happens to be our Ghost shoe, which is up 44% this year. It's our number 2 shoe. It's just a fantastic running shoe. So the shareholders are buying a lot of them.
Tell me about being in retail right now, online versus brick and mortar. How important is it with a shoe to have a real presence in the world, or can this all be done online?
I think in footwear, we all know in the industry that the in-store experience is never going to go away. They want to touch and feel a shoe, they want to try it on, they want advice on what the right shoe for them is. So that's never going to go away, but no question about it. Shopping behavior is changing dramatically. It's impacting every retailer and every brand. I've never seen this much change in consumer in my career.
A lot of change, especially happening this year, it feels like it. Jim Weber from Brooks, thank you so much for showing us this fun shoe and just talking to us about the business.
Thanks for coming by.
All right, Andy, back to you.
And Jen, I'm going to be running in those shoes tomorrow morning, so we'll be checking them out.
Right, exactly. I forgot. Andy's running in these tomorrow in your race, so we'll get a real report.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I need it. All right. The shareholder meeting will resume in about a half an hour. So how did Warren Buffett choose his 2 deputies, Todd Combs and Ted Weschler, widely considered to be the 2 men who will ultimately take over investment decisions at Berkshire? That was one of the questions I asked Buffett when I spoke to all 3 of them, especially for today's show.
Well, they're chosen for both ability and character. And for a very long time, investments were handled by just me and Charlie Munger, my partner. And then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Charlie and I talked about the desirability of bringing on somebody, or maybe more than one somebody, to both manage money now, but also in preparation for the day that Charlie and I won't be around. Having anybody join the Berkshire family and be an integral part of investing significant money, it's a big responsibility, and I wanted somebody who was going to be there for keeps. And I first found Todd 6 or 7 years ago, and Ted 5 or so years ago, and now we're all set, and they're handling $10 billion each. When we started, it was maybe $2 billion or so now. I've added capital to it, but it's one of the best decisions that Charlie and I have ever made was bringing these 2 on board.
So just to follow up though, Warren, I mean, was it a gut decision? You said you had all these people who potentially would want to take these jobs.
It's looking at what they had done and how they had done it and what kind of people they would be. I mean, I want somebody that I'd be happy if they were marrying my daughter, and it's a similar type of situation. I mean, there can't be any question about character.
So Ted, I mean, this is an incredible job, right? But maybe somewhat daunting. You're managing money for and with Warren Buffett. What's that like?
That's terrific. In many ways, it doesn't change much from my prior world where I ran a fund, and I've always been kind of a a one-man band analytically, and kind of our day job is reading. And I spend the vast majority of my day reading. I try to make about half of that reading random, things like newspapers and trade periodicals. But to be able to do that in an environment like Berkshire, and be able to learn by osmosis, by being able to compare notes with Warren. We get together for lunch every Monday, the three of us, and Tracy, if she's in town, she'll join us. And to compare notes on all sorts of things. And it's mainly Berkshire culture and things that have happened over Warren's investing life. It's very special. I first was introduced to Warren, not physically, but through a friend of mine in 1979 who said there's this guy who, out in Omaha, that when he writes, you really should read what he writes, because it's got a certain clarity to it. And I started reading it, and I've read over the years just about everything I think Warren put out there. And to have that as a backdrop, and then come into the organization and be able to interact on a regular basis, it's terrific.
And Ted, I know that you met Warren through a charity lunch.
Yeah.
And Todd, I want to turn to you and ask you, how did you meet Warren, and also what's it like working here?
Well, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I echo everything Ted said. I get asked a lot how my life has changed from before to after, and absent moving to Omaha, in terms of performing the investing function day to day, very little has actually changed, except the removal of some friction in terms of the fact that you don't have monthly reporting and LPs, and we have the benefit of permanent capital and so forth. But I met Warren, to go back to the first part of your question, through Charlie. And I called Charlie up just randomly, and I had always wanted to meet him. I had been out to a few meetings, and I called Charlie up, and we hit it off. We had breakfast for 3 or 4 hours, and luckily he called me a couple weeks later, and we continued discussions, and this kind of went back and forth for over the period of a couple months.
So how do you guys work together? I mean, you have this Monday lunch. Do you divide up the stock market into specific sectors? I'll start with you, Warren.
They've each got $10 billion. They could put it in one stock. You know, they can put it in one stock. They can put it in 10 stocks. They can put it in 100 stocks. They can. There's a couple things you have to be careful. We wouldn't ever do anything in Microsoft because Bill is on the board, and it might look. No matter what we wouldn't have inside information. If they were to buy something one day and something happened the next day, everybody would think we had it. So there's a few, very, very few. We wouldn't want to go over 10% on something that we already had it. But so there's maybe 10 stocks in total that are off limits, or 20 or something. But they don't have to check with me before they buy or sell anything. Sometimes they will have talked to me about something they're doing. Other times I will just look at the monthly recap I get and then see what they bought or sold. It's entirely their decisions on what they buy and sell. And diversification industries, there's no rules of any kind except avoid anything that there's a regulatory problem on.
And what's your day like then? How do you...
I get in around 7 or 8, and I read until about 7 or 8 at night, and I go home and see my family, and then I'll read for another hour or two in bed at night. And you know, there might only be 3 to 4 phone calls the entire week, so there's very, very few interruptions. I have a great assistant who knows everything that I read, and she kind of provides everything, and there's a back and forth between us where I'll mark it up and give it back to her, and we have a system for filing and so forth. But it's literally just reading about 12 hours a day of everything I just mentioned.
Charlie describes himself as a book with legs.
And
these are the only two guys we could find that read as much as we did. I should point out one advantage they have at Berkshire, of a very general sort, but we have dozens and dozens and dozens of businesses. And I've always said that I'm a better investor because I've had experience in business, and better businessman because I've had experience in investments. And Berkshire is about as good a place as you can find to really understand competitive dynamics and all that over the years.
Warren always talk about learning to learn and being lifelong learners, and that's something that impacted me because I started to read about that when I was in college. And I look at the last 5 years for me at Berkshire, and they have been the steepest learning curve of my life, and that's pretty powerful to say when you're 50.
So you talked about a planning, and and you said that these guys came in running $2 billion, now they run 10 plus billion. You
Right.
run, I think I read 120.
It's hard to tell. I mean, we've got 80 billion in treasury bills. That doesn't take a lot of running, but but all the rest of the liquid assets are under my auspices. But you know, I've turned over a fair amount, and
do you have a plan, Warren? I mean, how this is going to work?
I wouldn't have a formal plan, but I mean, it's clear where we're going. There's a lot of money to invest at Berkshire. Our number one hope is that we find operating businesses to invest in, but we'll always have a ton of marketable securities, and we'll probably have a fair amount of cash at all times too. But ideally, we would have less cash than we have now, because I'd rather own a business than own treasury bills.
Do you ever have your eye on making Berkshire the number one company in the Fortune 500?
Well, I think that
You're getting there.
I think over time, if we can find ways to reinvest all the earnings, it should become because we're reinvesting all the capital now. Whether we can do that intelligently at scale for how long is an open question. I mean, the money belongs to the shareholders, and we should only keep it if we think we're turning a dollar into more than a dollar when we keep it. And that gets harder, a lot harder, as we get bigger. And our success will be less in the future in doing it than it has been in the past, for sure. But if we can keep finding things, we'll keep generating cash to buy them.
I want to ask you guys about some specific stocks if I can, because, you know, there was the big high-profile Apple acquisition, and, you know, people are curious about who made that call. Does anyone want to take credit for that success? I mean, usually there's a...
We like to keep people guessing on that stuff.
There's no, going back to my point about the advantages of not running a fund and monthly reporting and dealing with, I never liked talking to my LPs about ideas that I had, and I think you guys are both the same, because then you become somewhat wed to it. It's harder to change your mind over time. You become pre-committed to your positions and so forth. So that's always been my stance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, why wouldn't you want to talk about stocks that you specifically picked? And or is it just because you want to keep this kind of a,
well, it is.
a
I
team
think
thing?
the point that Todd had is really important, that if you speak up and put it on record, you end up getting too wedded to your thesis. You know, and that's dangerous, because everything you're invested in is a function of the facts and circumstances on a given day. It changes.
People ask about it later on, you know, and we're not giving investment advice to people, and we don't want to recommend. We don't want to be talking about X where one way or another you get a slant on it by the time the interview is done, and have somebody, you know, we could change our mind next week or a month later, and somebody's out there that thinks we're giving investment advice to them. It doesn't make any sense.
We will likely be hearing from those guys for many years to come. Over my shoulder, Jen is with folks at one of the most popular exhibits here today, Dairy Queen. Jen.
Hi there, Andy. Yeah, I know that you drew the short stick, and I got to come to Dairy Queen, saving the best for last here. I'm joined by John Gaynor. He is CEO of Dairy Queen. So let's just start with, Warren comes in here, and he gets one of these in the morning. What does he get?
Well, Warren comes in the morning, he gets the vanilla orange bar. And he's been doing that every year that I've ever been here. So a lot of people come up to the booth and they say, well, I want what Warren eats. So we bring a lot of vanilla orange bars down. But in my hand, I have a special treat for you.
Yes, what is this? This does not look as, and I don't know if it's fair to call the vanilla orange bar healthy, which I think it is moderately. What is this one? Because this looks delicious.
This is our Blizzard of the Month. And we have a tie-in with Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy. And this is our Awesome Mix Blizzard.
What is in the Awesome Mix Blizzard?
Well, I'm glad you asked, okay? It has a brookie piece, which we are calling a Berkey piece for the weekend, okay? But you know, it's cookies and brownies, caramel topping, and choco trunk. And the Blizzard is the only treat that you can serve upside down.
Wow, you have to keep that in the freezer. I actually didn't know that. I'm glad it stayed in. That's what's actually happened with my Jell-O that I made, the Jell-O from the Kraft Heinz guys. I don't know if you went over there.
No.
I can't get them out either.
I would rather have this in Jell-O. And you know, we're in 27 countries, and the Blizzard brand alone now is over $1 billion brand.
Hey, what is it like to work with Warren Buffett? How much communication do you actually have with him?
Well, as you hear, Warren really allows us to run our businesses. And I remember the first time I met Warren, he said, use me however you need. So if you need to call Warren or write Warren, he gets back to you immediately. I mean, it's truly amazing. But what you hear at the meeting is he really entrusts us to run our brand, and he really tells us our job is to protect the Dairy Queen brand, in my case, and to protect the Berkshire Hathaway brand.
Can you give us any sneak peek? What's the next blizzard of the month?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my favorite coming up is we have a triple truffle blizzard. But you know, at DQ, we have great food as well. And last month, we launched our $5 lunch all day. So it's been, our fans love our $5 lunch. It's an entree, fries, drink, and a DQ sundae. And for $1 extra, you can upgrade to a small blizzard. So it's not all about ice cream at Dairy Queen. It's also food, beverages, and cakes.
$5 lunch. All right, well, right now I'm going to eat my $1 vanilla and orange bar, just like Warren. Andy, back to you.
You know, you better bring some of those up here when you come back up, okay?
Are going to be melted.
All right, we'll figure it out.
I'll let you have any.
All right, Jen, thanks. I'm joined by founder and former CEO of Vanguard, another very legendary investor, Jack Bogle. Jack, great to see you.
Andy, good to be with you again, always.
And what an incredible shout out you got this morning from Warren Buffett. How did that make you feel?
Well, it was, to me, much more than a shout out. I mean, it was a couple of pretty nice paragraphs. And it made me feel, I mean, I'm just a human being, Andy. It made me feel absolutely wonderful for a man like that to recognize it, recognize what I've done. And he's been a great booster of our 500 index fund. He's been a great booster of my books, which is always nice at the box office there. And we know each other a little bit. We first met actually at the time of the Solomon Brothers, which I think the catastrophe they went into back in around 1985. We were both speaking out on the West Coast, and that was the first time I met him in San Diego. And we've had a very nice relationship ever since. So praise from the master, calls me a hero, wants to build a statue for me. All nice. I mean, it's embarrassing, but it's nice.
Do you feel somewhat vindicated, Jack, after all these years of preaching this, and seems like the world's coming around to you?
Well, I guess vindication is a good word for it. I never sought vindication because I knew I was right. You know, the index fund delivers your fair share of the market return to investors. And, I mean, I'm going to guess that 300 people around here today have thanked me already. And only 299 of them wanted a selfie.
It's funny. What happens when the whole investing world becomes an index? Can there be too much indexing, and what would that do to returns?
Well, number one, if everybody indexed, the only word you could use is chaos, catastrophe, whatever. There would be no trading. There'd be no way to convert a stream of income into a pile of capital, or a pile of capital into a stream of income. The markets would fail. Now, what's the chance of everybody indexing? It's zero. And at what point then, maybe is a more realistic question. Indexing is around 23 or 4% of U.S. stock market today. Could it get to 50% without having any bad consequences? Easily. We have too much trading in the market. The index really just neutralizes X percentage of the market, 25% or 50%, and it's just those stocks don't get traded. So the other stocks would be traded, the market would go on as ever, and might get a little less efficient. But if it gets a little less efficient, and some managers can win by more, some managers will lose by more. This is the equation. So I'm not concerned about it. It's going to take a long, long time to get anywhere near 50%. And things will change a lot in a lot of other ways by then.
Do you have any idea what percent it becomes dangerous?
And I think you could easily be at 75% and not have it become dangerous. But dangerous in what sense? The markets are going to be efficient as long as there are managers or investors who are trying to find little holes in the system, create value, discover value, price discovery as they call it. And so I don't worry about that. And I meant not to be too negative about it, but it's certainly not going to happen during my lifetime.
So I want to ask you about systemic risk, which we discovered can be a huge problem in 2008, 2009. Is there a potential for a systemic risk in investment companies, in big fund companies?
Well, not as long as the markets function. The markets are great arbitrageurs of the past and the present and the future. And when they do that, the stock market responds very, very quickly. And the market clears, as they say. It may clear at substantially lower prices. And, if it's an interim thing or a rumor, it will bounce back to a fair relationship between price and value. I do have a concern about liquidity in the municipal bond fund market, very big part of the particularly Vanguard business, but also the fund business. And the bond market doesn't have that kind of liquidity. But in the stock market, whereas most of the problems are apt to come from, is, I think, going to clear very quickly.
What about ETFs, Jack? I mean, are there too many of them? It seems like they're so specialized they kind of defeat the purpose of what they were created for.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, you wax on it. You're the expert.
The reality is there are too many. They're too narrowly diversified. They're too speculative, and they're traded far, far, far too often. The Standard & Poor's SPDR, so-called S&P 500 ETF, is the most widely traded stock in the world every day. It turns over at 6,000% a year, Andy. And for me, conservative investor, I think 3% turnover is kind of pushing the envelope a little bit.
So what about mutual funds versus ETFs? Where do you come out on that? Which one's better?
Well,